Hello, fellow YouTubers. This is Karen S. Recently, I watched the Matt Dillahunty debate on the Bible Thumping Wingnut show, and I noticed this really great comment by one arguing from ignorance, uh, where there was a timestamp for every time Matt Slick or Bible Thumping Wingnut, in one case, contradicted themselves. And I thought, instead of viewers having to link through all these timestamps, why don't I just edit them out so everyone can see them all lined up right next to each other? So here they are, and please enjoy.
Fallacy.
Oh, the fallacy, what I say is yeah, there's a third option, but I'm not going to tell you what it is.
No. I'm saying that what you presented me was not a true dichotomy. And
I didn't say it was.
Your response is to ask, well, then what is the third option, in order to avoid demonstrating that those are the only two? Not a fallacy.
Okay, let's not call it a fallacy. We'll call it the, what do you want to call it? How about this? The Dillahunty dodge. How's that?
How about the slick confusion? Because because you assert that something is the case and I can't give you a label for what you actually agree with me on, doesn't mean that I've done anything wrong or irrational. I won't take your admission of ignorance as an opportunity to extend that to all Christian worldviews and then therefore imply that I'm somehow correct.
Well, the atheistic worldview negates God's existence.
There is no the atheistic worldview,
yes,
and it's not a negation of God. It's not a negation of God's existence.
Yes, it is. It's functionally a negation. You argue against God's existence. You behave based on what you believe, not what you don't believe. All right, so the tag back up. I wanted to find out where you're at because I like to cater answers, responses, to individual atheists because there are different forms and varieties of atheism.
I said I wasn't going to talk to tag, but of course we still are. But that's okay.
Because the power. See, you said that the God explanation has no explanatory power. So then, by definition, then by definition, the atheistic perspective has to have all of the explanatory power.
No, because you're assuming that something can necessarily be explained. It may be the case that there is no explanation.
Well, I don't agree that there aren't any explanations.
Are you saying that the transcendental can't be verified?
I have to think about that. Can the transcendental be verified? The problem with the transcendental being verified would be that we'd be subjecting a transcendental to the non-transcendental, our verification. There's a problem in that, inherent there. I'm saying that I thought about this for a while. If God exists, let me back up here a little bit. I've talked to a lot of atheists, and they'll say, give me some evidence of God's existence. The parting of an ocean, a voice out of the sky, levitation of something. They're going to say no. Why? Because it's subjective. Because what they're doing, in my opinion, is making a huge mistake, requiring a physical form of evidence for a transcendental being. And if you have a presupposition, no, I don't know what's outside the universe.
So have you painted yourself into a corner where you don't know what's outside the universe?
Because I'm not the one saying that there's no way.
I did.
I'm not the one saying there's no way to verify God's existence.
Yes, you are, actually.
No, I'm not.
I talked to you about how to do this, and you said that, okay, I take that back. You did not say there was no way to do it. You said you were unaware of any way to do it.
Okay, now I'm lost in the conversation here because you're referring to something I'm not recalling. I was saying to you that the transcendent properties of God, at least theoretically, can be manifested in our physical realm, in our physical universe. I then said, for example, the transcendent properties of the laws of logic are evidence or would be categorized as an evidence of God's existence. Also, I was saying the person and work of Jesus detect and verify divinity. See, that's what I'm saying is you'd say, how do we detect divinity? Well, that's why I asked you, what color is it? How much does it weigh? You wouldn't be able to verify it.
You're the one who believes that this is divine. I don't. So what is your mechanism for detecting divinity?
Properties of divinity.
What does that mean?
Properties of anything. We don't sense the actual essence of something. We experience the properties of something.
Okay. So if God revealed himself to me the way you did, the way he did to you,
yeah,
would I then have a sound justification for believing that God exists?
You wouldn't have any choice but to believe he exists.
Great. Now, absent that, do I have a sound justification to believe that God exists?
Yes, you do.
Okay. Now, you've just acknowledged that with or without that revelation, it's possible for me to have a sound justification that God exists. And not a minute ago, it's my understanding that different Christian denominations have disagreements about nearly every aspect of Christendom. I mean, when they were going through the biblical canon, they removed the people who thought that. So there are some who say that Jesus was all man, some who say that Jesus was all divine, some who said that he was both, some who say that he was, neither, that he existed on some spiritual plane. These exist in different realms for people who identify as Christian. There are people like the caller who called into the show today does not think that God is omnipotent or omniscient. He identifies as a Christian. He disagrees with the definition that you just gave a little bit ago.
Well, have him call my show, and then he and I can work that out.
But can we at least agree that Christians don't agree on the God concept? Or people identifying as Christians don't agree on the God concept?
No, we can't agree. I can't see that as a true statement, because the implication is that you're implying all. Let me explain why. You're implying that all Christians always disagree in all aspects of the God idea.
No, what I'm saying is that there are Christians, people identify as Christians, who have different God concepts. They have different concepts in their mind of God.
Like the Mormons and the Christians. Yeah, the Mormons are not. This isn't a debate on Mormonism and Christianity, because it's an in-house debate. But I wanted you to understand that there are certain realms within Christian theology in the Bible, and I'm quite qualified to discuss who and what God is biblically versus other religious systems. When you talk about denominational difference.
And I'm not.
No, you're not.
I'm not. 20 years as a Southern Baptist, studying to be a preacher, I'm not qualified to comment on Christianity.
Oh, I didn't know you were 25 years and studying to be a preacher. I apologize. I had no idea. Seriously, I didn't know. So let me test you then. Let's see what you do know. Okay.
I'm not interested in that right now.
Oh, okay. So I want to test to see if you really know what Christianity is, because when I hear you say things like this, it tells me you don't.
You know, true Christian fallacy.
I know what the Bible says about Jesus Christ, for example. I know what it says about him. If someone says that God...
As do I, Matt, and my point was...
No, you don't.
This was very simple. I said there are people who... I made it as easy for you as possible. There are people who identify as Christian who have different God concepts. That is simply a fact. And it's a fact because...
You are absolutely correct. People do...
Then why didn't you say that a second ago when I asked this very clearly?
Because you're not understanding that there is a true issue of what Christian is.
I don't care what you think a true Christian is.
You don't?
No, it doesn't matter, because somebody else has a different definition of what a true Christian is, and until the two of you provide a mechanism by which I can determine which is a true Christian, then you're on the same footing.
So even if we could convince you that Jesus Christ rose from the dead, that wouldn't be enough evidence for you that he's the creator of all things, and that people go to heaven and hell and all this other teachings of Scripture. Even if we were able to prove it to you, to your satisfaction.
No, but let's be serious for a second. Nothing remotely like the sort of evidence that you're hypothesizing occurs. None of us.
No.
Okay, so if I could then raise people from the dead, would you then believe that I was God?
Actually, no, I wouldn't.
Okay, but we're talking about the laws of logic. These various laws that you use and that I use, we both presuppose as being valid. My worldview, I can account for them. And your worldview, you can't provide any intellectual justification for their universality and their truth values.
See, that's why I said I presuppose them. You claim that you can give an account for them, and so do all the presuppositionalists I've engaged with, and yet they never actually give an account for them. And moreover, I don't know if you actually identify as a presuppositionalist. Somebody has said you don't, and yet you're going with tag and
I do.
Okay, I'm with you there. We're like bros on the do and don't on various things. But the thing is, the presuppositionalists are claiming that they have solved the problem of hard solve system, the problem of induction, and can give an account for the logical absolutes. And they are also claiming that no other worldview can. Now, most philosophers are acknowledging agreement with the no other worldview can, or in saying that nobody has given an account of these things. And yet the precepts claim that they can. And yet they fail to meet either that, which in order to demonstrate, they'd have to demonstrate that they can give an account and that nobody else can. I don't know how they could demonstrate for certain or to a reasonable certainty that nobody else can.
Well, I wouldn't argue that no one else can right now. I would just say that I'm only going to argue the Christian worldview. because that's the only one I'm going to argue. And I believe all other worldviews are inconsistent ultimately, but that's another topic.
But see, if you say that the Christian worldview can account for these things, first of all, it's kind of an empty proposition, because you could assume some hypothetical explanation that would be sufficient to explain it, assuming that we can determine what would be sufficient to explain it, but you haven't demonstrated that it's necessary. It's like saying that I don't know what caused my bank account to go from $1,000 to $100 overnight, but I do have a worldview that could account for it, and that worldview is that money pixies snuck in and removed it all. Now that is clearly a sufficient account, but it's not a necessary account, and there's been no demonstration that's true. So claiming that Christianity can give an account for something is really a kind of a vapid concept. It's like saying, hey, we don't know why the universe exists, but I have a worldview that includes a God who is capable of making a universe, and so my worldview has given an account of this, which doesn't matter until you actually demonstrate that your worldview is true.
You may not like that, and you may not agree with it, but at least I have an explanation from a Christian worldview. As an atheist, you don't have any way to account for the universality of the laws of logic.
Correct, and I don't think you do either. People in ancient times had an explanation for lightning, and they were wrong.
Well, I just gave you one. Show me that my demonstration or my logic is wrong.
Argument from ignorance. X is true until it's proven to be false. That is not the way we go about establishing the truth of things. You don't get because anybody who believed that Thor was throwing lightning bolts, could have said the same thing. Oh, you say that there's no good reason to believe this? Prove me wrong. Well, no, your job as the person who is asserting a position and an explanation is to demonstrate this. And if instead you say, prove me wrong, you are engaged in the argument from ignorance fallacy.
That's the whole point. The disjunctive syllogism, which you agreed to at the beginning, the atheistic worldview cannot do it at all. It cannot account for the universality of the laws of logic.
Prove it. Prove that there is no atheistic explanation for the laws of logic.
I can't, because every one that I've ever had from an atheist hasn't worked.
Oh, okay. So every swan I've ever met is white. How many fallacies are you going to throw in one big gulp?
I tell you what, falsify my statement. Tell me from your atheistic perspective how you can account for them. Tell me how you can.
Proof. You asserted that it's impossible for the atheistic view to do this. That is your claim. Prove it.
All right. Let's try this. If there's no God, then that which is in the universe must be naturalistically based. It must operate out of the laws of physics and/or energy and everything else that's a property of the universe, right?
Not necessarily.
No? So there's something else besides the universe out there?
I don't know.
Okay, so you argue that you don't know things, you don't know what's out there, you don't know if God's there, you don't know what's beyond the universe, you don't know anything about anything, and that's how you're going to defend your position?
Well, actually, you're the one in the position for defending, and it's not a matter of me not knowing anything about anything. The one thing I do know something about is reasoning and avoiding fallacies, which you just did like a parade of 18 of them. Is that no atheistic worldview can give an account for these, and you try to demonstrate this by showing that I don't have an account for that, which I'd already recognized and acknowledged. Okay. So where's your demonstration that's impossible for there to ever be an account for these? And then, if you were actually able to do that, you need to have a demonstration that it's possible that there could be an account for these.
In perspective, we can account for the universality of the laws of logic, which you've admitted you can't do. So to say that the Christian God is not an explanation for anything is just a denial that, yes, I have used him as a necessary precondition, because, again, by the impossibility of the contrary, we have God, we have not God.
You haven't demonstrated.
What does it mean to demonstrate? What do you want me to do? Is get a lever with a string on it and say, see, this is how God does it. Let me show you how his hand works, and that's how the universality of the laws of logic work? You haven't made any point by that.
You haven't demonstrated the impossibility of the contrary. You've just asserted it over and over and over again. And then when I bring this point up, you want me to demonstrate that some other worldview can.
The issue with the impossibility of the contrary is that the atheistic perspective cannot account for the transcendental laws of logic.
Prove it.
Okay. We have the physical universe or we don't have the physical universe. If God exists, he's not part of the physical universe. This is why earlier I was saying to you about the issue of the laws of logic, the universe did not exist. You said, yes, if they did not exist, then The laws of logic are still valid and still true. That means they're not properties of the physical realm. That means your naturalism goes away, which you said you affirm earlier.
No,
so if
actually,
you're natural, yes, you did.
No, we were very clear on naturalism, and remember this hemming and hawing about whether or not, and you're kind of like, I'm kind of a presuppositionalist and kind of not, and I said that, you know, that we were bros on that. Do you remember that? And that was a reference to the naturalism thing. The idea that if the world goes away, suddenly naturalism goes away, I don't accept, because naturalism is in contrast with supernaturalism.
If the world goes away, there's nothing natural to be. There's nothing in the universe that exists. Naturalism goes away.
Which doesn't. So now you're talking about a nothing. Okay. I'm not saying that that nothing is unnatural.
How do you have laws of logic in a nothingness? Because you were saying that your laws of logic are not dependent upon the physical realm. If the physical realm goes away, you said they're still valid. That's what you said. So how do you account for that? How do you justify that?
When I'm talking about naturalism, I'm not just talking about our local presentation of the universe. Whether it turns out the multiverse is correct, or if you wipe everything
all
out,
of that.
If you get rid of all of that, that doesn't mean that what's left is unnatural.
If there's nothing that exists, we can't have anything that's natural.
It doesn't mean that there's anything that we currently identify as natural left. That doesn't mean that what is left, which would be nothingness, is unnatural. It's now this is the problem of nothing. But what you just said a minute ago is that if you presuppose God, you now have an account for all of these things that you listed.
Yes, you do.
Okay, what justification is there to presuppose God? Because when to me, I have given you the list of things that I'm willing to presuppose, and one of the key things is that when we do those presuppositions, we should not have too many of them unnecessarily. We should not multiply entities. And by multiplying entities, you could look at that as going a step further. If you're uncomfortable with not having an account for the logical absolutes, that doesn't mean that you're justified in presupposing what you view as an explanation for them. And it doesn't mean that your proposed explanation, whether it's an explanation or not, is actually true. Okay, so then you have no objection in my position.